Have you ever wondered how far can a single act of kindness travel? Today's episode is sponsored by Biget's Balloon, The Magic of Smiles, a children's book that's inspiring kids nationwide to discover how far a single act of kindness can really travel. More about this magical story coming up soon. Hey everyone, I'm Bianca Schulze, founder of the Children's Book Review, and this is the Growing Readers Podcast. Today, I'm so thrilled to welcome Newbery Medal winner Meg Medina to discuss her stunning new middle grade fantasy novel, Graciela in the Abyss. What makes this book so remarkable is its journey to publication, a 15-year process that speaks volumes about creative perseverance and the evolving nature of storytelling. Meg Medina is the 8th National Ambassador for Young People's Literature and a New York Times best-selling author who writes for children and teens. She has won numerous awards for her work, including the Ezra Jack Keats Writer Award, as well as the Pura Belpré Award and Honor. She is the 2019 Newbery Medal winner for her novel Mercy Suarez Changes Gears. When she's not writing, she works on community projects that support Latinx youth, and she lives with her family in Richmond, Virginia. Whether you're a longtime fan of Meg's contemporary, realistic fiction like the Mercy Suarez trilogy, or you're discovering her work for the first time through this magical underwater adventure, you're in for a treat as we explore the depths of story, friendship, and what it means to create your own light in the darkness. Please join me in welcoming Meg Medina, but first, here's the book synopsis. A sea ghost, a mortal boy, and a dangerous, enchanted harpoon. A Newbery medalist takes us far beneath the waves in this extraordinary foray into fantasy. In the deepest recesses of the ocean, Graciela, once an ordinary girl, now makes sea glass and assists her friend Amina as she welcomes newly awakened sea ghosts from their death sleep. Though Graciela's spirit is young, she has lived at the bottom of the ocean for more than 100 years. Meanwhile, in the mortal world on land, 12-year-old Jorge Leon works in his family's forge. He's heard of the supernatural spirits living beneath the ocean waves, tales that do nothing to quell his fear of the water. But when Jorge discovers a hand-wrought harpoon with the power to spear a sea ghost, he knows he must destroy it any way he can. When the harpoon is accidentally reunited with its vengeful creator, unlike allies, Graciela and Jorge have no choice but to work together to keep evil spirits from wreaking havoc on both the living and the dead. If only the answer to saving what they care about didn't lie within the depths of the abyss. Newbery Medal winner Meg Medina and illustrators Ana and Elena Balbusa have crafted a thoughtful tale infused with magic and high-stakes adventure that will leave readers wondering what power lies in the depths of the ocean and inside each of us. Hi, Meg. Welcome to the Growing Readers Podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm very happy. One of the things that I do is I kind of have some first-time guest questions, and so I'm really excited that I get to ask you these questions. So one that I always like to ask is, what's one thing that you do in your day-to-day practices that you feel would either be the most surprising or the most relatable to listeners?
Well, I would say I snack heavily. I will say that. So as I'm writing, I definitely stop for snacks all the time. I don't know. I'll stand in front of the pantry and think. But I think the most surprising thing would be that, especially these days, I take a moment to close my eyes and be consciously thankful for something that day. It might be something as simple as a beautiful sunny day. We're recording on a day that's gorgeous outside. It might be that I had a wonderful walk with my dog. It doesn't have to be large, but it helps quiet the noise of our times and centers me on things that are positive. So I think that would surprise people that I make time to do that every day.
You are an incredible author, so I have to ask you this one. What drives you and guides you in creating books for kids?
First of all, I love kids. I love children really at all points that they're growing up, whether they're 4 years old, dressed in a Spider-Man costume or a tutu in the supermarket, or whether they're kind of a surly 17-year-old taking names. I love all of those stages, and I have enormous respect for kids, I think, for what they're going through in growing up. But I think what really drives me is a sense of story, a sense of making sense of what I saw and felt myself growing up. And I write for that connection moment with the reader when they write to me and say, this story was very much like what happened to my family, or I completely get that character, or I despise that character, or why did you do this? Like the connection that they make to the story and to themselves and to their own situation. That feels like gold to me every time it happens. It's really sustaining because what it does is sort of move your work from just being, the plot, pushing words around and characters around on a page and so on, into something more meaningful, right? Something that lasts longer with kids, that become the book they remember from when they were growing up and so on.
To be a writer, they say you must be a reader first. So let's start with, do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I do and I don't. For me, I was a reader always. I can't remember a time when I didn't love to read and really just consume story. I like oral storytelling as well. My family just couldn't help themselves. It was just a constant, barrage of stories of Cuba, their lives, etc. So for me, yes, I was absolutely a reader. But what was surprising for me is that I recently finished my ambassadorship for the U.S. as the youth literature ambassador. And part of it, I did a video series called Let's Talk Books, Cuéntame Let's Talk Books, which, readers can find on YouTube. And I interviewed, I think it ended up being like 19 children's and teens authors about who they were as children and what their habits were and what their thoughts were on reading, because that was so much of the job of the ambassadorship, right? Encouraging people to read and get in touch with their reading lives again. And I was really struck by the number of authors who were poor readers when they were children and didn't come to reading right away and didn't feel seen or entertained or engaged by reading until much later, until they felt like the choices they were making were being respected, whether they liked comic books or whatever, or whether the story really spoke to their lives in a way that other books that we typically see taught, in high school and so on, weren't reaching them. So I don't ever think it's an easy answer. I do think that reading just amplifies your toolbox as a writer, for sure, because it's not only about vocabulary, but it's about, styles and strategies and what's on the minds of authors as they're working, how they handle hard things, easy things, how they're funny. All of those things you can unpack and learn as you're reading. So for me, it worked that way, but I don't know. I don't necessarily think that as children, all writers were readers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. Were you a reader when you were young?
You know what? When I look back, I can connect all the dots where I think I was a reader, but I didn't identify as a reader. And I struggled to learn to read.
Mm-hmm.
I found it really difficult. So, I look at my children, and I know it's different for everybody, but by second grade, they were reading all of the fun chapter books and whatnot. For me, in second grade, I was still sounding out each word, and getting through an early reader book was a challenge for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love asking that question because everybody actually has a slightly different response to it. And I love that one that you gave.
And I like that you were not a strong reader, and here you are with this podcast. And I have 3 kids, all grown. They're in their 30s now. That should tell you how grown they are. And I had all different kinds of readers. I had the kid who was the early, really wonderful reader. I had the kid who could read really well but didn't like it. And I had a daughter, my oldest daughter, who in her case, she had lots of learning disabilities and was intellectually disabled. And she really struggled to read. But today, in her 30s, is a reader. So it's interesting, the path that we take to find how to unlock story. And it sounds like when I look at this podcast, you found a way to do it with both words and audio and this wonderful storytelling in conversation.
So Meg, I actually love the words that you use there, like unlocking story. Was there a specific moment for you where you felt like you unlocked story? And did that happen for you as a kid, or did that happen more for you as you were coming into being a writer? What does that mean to you?
What a great way to think about it. I think it happened at both points in my life. I think we unlock different things at different points. So as a child, I remember Charlotte's Web. And I just remember this one day when I was reading it, I was at the part where Charlotte leaves her eggs to Wilbur. And it suddenly occurred to me that she was going to die. And she was this big, trusting thing to leave the most precious thing to her friend Wilbur, who she had, of course, saved. And I remember it so clearly because our class used to read after lunch for 20 or 30 minutes. And I remember my desk and how the sun was coming in the window. And I remember that my eyes filled up with tears. And I just felt this overwhelming feeling. And it's the first time that I could remember that a book inspired emotion inside of me. And emotion linked to things that I was feeling. I had friends who I loved very much, like that. I was learning all about being a human. And here is this book featuring animals that is, in fact, about the most important parts of being a human being, kindness and loyalty and helping one another. So that's the first memory I have of a book doing that for me. And then in writing, I think what had to get unlocked for me was the notion that the stories that reside in me were enough and worthy of becoming a book. So, I come from folks who were oral storytellers for sure, just chatterboxes, but no one would have said that they were a writer or a storyteller or anything like that. But the richness of their experiences, of what they had gone through to leave their country, the tempo of how they told story, the details that they shared, the sense of drama. My grandmother was just the best. Bina was just the best at storytelling. That all fed into, this ability to look at, my aunt buying the first family car for us. And that became the Aisa Wants a Car. My very first friend as a child was a girl named Evelyn Guzman, also a Cuban girl who lived a couple blocks away. And I have a picture book called Evelyn Del Rey is Moving Away. No More Señora Mimi, about a little girl and her babysitter. My first babysitter's name was Mimi. So none of them are memoir, but all of them capture like the thing that stayed in my heart about that person or about that event. And then I reshape it. I give myself permission to reshape it and work with it and create something else. But it was a surprise to me. I had to come to that knowledge that I didn't have to be some sort of super exceptional person leading this incredible life to have something to say. And I think that's important when we're working with young people and their own writing and their own stories, to celebrate the life that they're living exactly as it is, and to remind them that that is enough. Thinking about what you're living and capturing it and retelling it is enough to connect with other people and to say something of value about being you and being a kid or in a family or in a school or whatever.
That was a beautiful answer. And it's funny because my next question for you, I feel like you kind of just answered it, but I'm going to ask it just in case you want to add anything. It's like, did you enjoy being a kid, and how much of your childhood finds its way into your stories? And like I said, I feel like you just naturally exposed that. But if there's anything else you wanted to add there.
Well, I would say what I would honestly add is, did I like being a kid? Not always. My life had a lot of difficult parts to it growing up. So, when my family arrived, of course, there was economic need, life of newcomers to this country, no language, very little money, etc. My parents' marriage dissolved, and I grew up with my mom and my sister in New York. And there was just a lot of sadness and a lot of trauma and a lot of mental health things that went on in the family that's experienced those kinds of upheavals. So that was absolutely part of my childhood. So while I did love my friends and Glee Club and learning about Girl Scouts and all of the, sort of quintessential American things of childhood, I was also juggling very adult things that were happening at home and troubling things. I found being a teenager just excruciating. And you can see that in Burn Baby Burn. You could see that in Yaqui Delgado. Parts of the things that stayed with me and that I remember, I try to grab those and put them on the page and just see what they do. There's a reason we remember things. They claw in our memory, not just because of the event per se, but what it really meant or what it did to you in some way, either positive or negative. And that could be something simple like remembering your grandmother's hands, rolling dough, or it could be something really painful, like being in the crosshairs of a bully. So, it's funny because when I was emerging from adolescence and in my 20s and so on, like my overwhelming thought was, thank goodness I made it through. I never want to do that again.
Yeah.
Get me out of here. I want no part of this. And how do I spend my life? 100% of the time thinking about childhood and growing up and all of that. But I mean, it comes in handy because in some way, like when you're writing for children, right, the idea is that there is hope. Like the characters go through, all these terrible things you put in their path, but eventually like they end sort of on a propulsive note, like expect a stronger character, a future for that character as you're finishing the novel or the picture book or anything like that. I mean, I think that's hallmark to writing for children, but I feel like there's something about writing the hard things and letting kids see that you can experience these really awful things, and eventually they can turn into something really beautiful and powerful. You don't see it when you're living it, but that's what I know anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. You already kind of touched on being the 8th National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, which is amazing. And that you did talk to like 19 different authors about writers for kids and teens. But just that whole experience, sort of in a nutshell, what did that mean to you to be able to hold that role? Did having that role did you end up like kind of adjusting the way you thought about writing for kids, or just, what impact did that role have on you personally?
That's very interesting. Well, it was an amazing experience, and it's a very humbling experience, right? There's a huge amount of trust that's placed on you. And I felt that weight in two ways. One is I was the first Latina in that role. And so I knew that I was the ambassador for all children in the US. But for Latin children in particular, I had a special responsibility, right? To really celebrate what a literary life looks like. So I felt like there was a need to make sure that I was celebrating all children, and that Latin children especially got to celebrate this moment with me. The other thing was you're you're an ambassador of children's literature, which means you're also bringing the work of your colleagues to children. So you spend 2 years really celebrating the beautiful work that is being produced by children's authors right now. And there's no way to talk about all of them. So there's the pressure of like, who am I going to talk about and where and so on. So I just try to be as expansive as possible and to book talk and to listen to kids book talk to me about the books that they were reading and why, and offering kids new authors that maybe they weren't aware of and to experiment with. So it was really wonderful. The other thing that was wonderful was office hours. I did public office hours at the Library of Congress. I had this beautiful office. It's in the dome, what the library calls it, the attic of the library. And just if you've ever been there, the Library of Congress is just a stunningly beautiful building. Every other month, I would come up on a Saturday from my home in Richmond, and I would hold office hours with the public, and kids would come with their families and book talk to me. And what stayed with me from that experience, it was fun to certainly tell them about the library and have them tell me what they wanted to say about reading. But I realized that the families that came to me, there were some that were really knit together. There was one in particular, the dad loved comic books. And so he kept his whole collection in those little weird plastic folders and so on. And his daughter was a graphic novel fan. She was 14 and she kept her favorite books for the 10-year-old sister who was coming up. And then there was a little boy in the family. This family went to book events. They came to see me, of course, at office hours, but they would go to author signings. They would go to book festivals. They would read to each other. They would share books. And what I saw in live action was that reading, that a literary art, that a literary life is yet another way to knit families together. We think about families, doing sports together, going to see their children's school play and so on. But reading, if we think of it bigger than a subject at school, and instead we think about it as a family activity, something our family believes in, something that we do sort of separately and share together, that was such a beautiful thing to behold. And I guess I knew it in the back of my mind, but I got to really see it as ambassador. So yeah, that was the biggest impact. That and my reading list. The kids left me with so many things I'm supposed to read. I think I will be 90 or 100 before I finish all the titles that they gave me, but I kept careful track and I've been reading them. So I'll buy new books that are coming out, but I always make sure that I'm at the library grabbing the one that they said, oh, you have to read this manga or this horror or this series, or just because that's what was in their heart enough and important enough that they wanted to tell me about it. And so I feel like it's important to honor that.
Yeah, I love that. And there were so many things I wanted to ask you about there, but I guess where my heart is going right now is, when he said like which books do you book talk? And there's so many amazing, talented writers to choose from. And this is my day-to-day struggle. Like who is the next guest on the podcast? Or I have the children's book review. Which book am I going to pick to read and review? And, it's so hard. But I used to go off of if somebody I trusted that I know knows me really well recommended a book to me, I was like, well, then I have to read it because they know me. They've seen a piece of my heart. They've read this book and they're connecting it with me. And that was such a magical feeling. And I feel like I can't do that anymore because there are so many people saying, you have to read this book. So
I know you'll be reading forever.
It's purely just like my gut instinct now is like, no, this is the next book. But yeah, I love that you took down all the kids' recommendations.
I did. I maintain them on a little shelf that I have on Bookshop, keeping track of all of that. So if folks want to see the books that I book talk and the books that kids told me to read, I have that shelf. You can look up Meg Medina books and you'll see them there.
Perfect. I'm going to put it in the show notes so
Sure.
anyone listening can go and find that link directly. Well, and then for anybody that listens to the podcast that likes my book recommendations, then you absolutely have to pick up Meg's newest book. And ahead of recording, I chuckled because I'm terrible at pronouncing Spanish words and names. So Meg, will you say the title first for everybody so that when I say it, they'll just know what it's supposed to sound like?
Graciela in the Abyss.
So, Graciela in the Abyss.
Very nice.
Thank you. It's your first venture into fantasy. So, what inspired you to create this underwater world of sea ghosts and a magical harpoon?
Well, so many things. How to say it? I started writing this book in 2010, if you can believe it. It was supposed to be my second novel. I had written a first novel that was called Milagros, Girl from Away. It was published by Henry Holt Books. And it just was a quiet book. It was magical realism, touching on magical realism. So I'm not completely foreign to fantasy, but my career evolved mostly with the contemporary voice, contemporary realism, whether in picture book or in novels. It's been a very long time. But I put that book away. I knew I wanted to write about friendship. I knew I love the ocean and I'm terrified of the ocean. So I knew I wanted a story set there. But my goodness, I couldn't make it work. Every year, I have a file in my computer. I tell everybody this, and I tell writers this because I think everyone needs this. It's called The Graveyard. And I put all the things, the false starts, the chapters that my editor will have me remove from a book, let's say, if we're working, all the false steps, and I keep them dated. And with Graciela, the bones in there go back to 2010. And every year you can see I have a new version. Sometimes it's first person, sometimes it's third person. Now at first it's two girls, now it's this boy. Now it kept evolving and I couldn't find the story. And that is the most frustrating thing for a writer when you want to make something work and you just can't. What's in your heart and what's coming out of your fingers will not match. So what happened, I think, is that the world needed to tilt and I needed to grow at the same time. I had a couple of very big losses in my life. My mom died in 2013. And then my aunt, who was my mother's sister, died in 2020 during the pandemic in a very sad set of circumstances. The world went into the pandemic and we were all suddenly cut off from each other and very afraid. And there was death everywhere. And about that time in 2020, my middle daughter became a nurse. She graduated nursing school and she was thrust into nursing during the very worst of the pandemic. And on top of all of that, our national discourse, the temperature of how people are with one another just became really, really hot and toxic and difficult to bear. So all of those things were cooking. And I went back into the graveyard and I dug up the bones of this story. And I set it in the abyss, which is the very deepest part of the ocean where there is no light, where there, for a long time, it was thought that there was no life. But in fact, it is teeming with life that does not depend on sunlight. It depends mostly on chemicals in the earth. One thing that I loved as I was thinking about the abyss, and you have to think really deep, picture about between 7 and 11 Empire State Buildings stacked one on top of the other. That's how deep we're talking. The thing about the abyss is that the creatures there migrate every night. It's the biggest migration in the world. And it happens every night at sunset because the darkness expands and what's in the abyss can rise to hunt. And that's when you see so much bioluminescent display. And what struck me about bioluminescence is that sometimes it's a lure, right? To get something to come close so you could eat it. Sometimes it's a disguise to make yourself look bigger so something won't eat you. Sometimes it's a scream. There's something called a fear scream where they explode in light as a last-ditch resort. But ultimately, it's light that you have to make yourself. And as I was thinking about kids growing up, I think that if you boil it all down, is what you have to learn when you grow up, how to make your own light, to survive, to protect yourself, to see, to be seen, all of those things. So that started sort of as a central image. And then I just kept going. And I ended up with this adventure story that, these two unlikely friends, a girl named Graciela, who's dead. She's been a sea spirit. When you die and are buried at the sea, you sleep for 100 years. And when you awaken in a new form and you have a job. Hers is being a glazier. So she turns all the broken things, the trash and so on in the world, into beautiful pieces of sea glass that are left on the shore for the living. But spirits have all kinds of jobs, which the novel explains. So it's the story of her and this young boy named Jorge, whose family, he's a living boy, whose family was responsible for fashioning this really terrible magical harpoon. And so it's an adventure story. Are they going to get this harpoon out of the sea before it causes, the balance of the sea to end? But it's also a story about friendship and loyalty and what we owe each other in a community and what kindness looks like and what happens. What are the things that turn us away from kindness and to bitterness? So, it's meant for kids who are 10 to 14, a little older, right? Because, they are all dead, right? and things happen, right? But, we don't want to...
Deep, dark seas.
Right.
Yeah.
We'd like children to someday sleep again. So it is for 10 to 14-year-olds. But I think... what I said to my editor was, okay, please make sure I don't write a silly fantasy. I don't want something that's just plot. I want something that really gives kids something to talk about and think about with each other, with their families, with their teachers as they read it. And that they also enjoy because it's fast-paced. So that was the job. And so far, the response has been really positive. The reviews are coming in. That horrible, lonely time of waiting for the reviews to come in is in itself an abyss, but I'm happy with how people are responding to it so far.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I could only come up with really corny lines, but I was like, your language feels like a whale singing to me. It was so beautiful, your descriptive language. And I love that there was the glossary in the back because I definitely had to go check that out for a couple of the words. I love that because it stretches you and helps you grow as a reader and obviously that literacy part. But just your language is so beautiful. And I'm not going to do any spoilers whatsoever, but the ending, my eyes were watering, and so it really touched me. Let's take a moment to highlight a book that's creating real magic in children's lives. Bajette's Balloon, The Magic of Smiles by New Jersey author Claudia Colonna. This social-emotional learning adventure follows Bajette and her friend Bobby as they discover how small acts of kindness can transform entire communities. With a mysterious color-changing balloon as their guide, kids ages 3 to 8 learn about empathy, diversity, and important life themes like aging, disability, and environmental care. What makes this book special? Every illustration is hand-drawn and real acts of generosity inspired the story. One mom from New York shared that the book inspired her 4-year-old daughter to immediately go to her playroom and pick out toys to donate to kids in need. And that's the power of Bajette's Balloon. Claudia is currently touring schools and libraries with her Magic of Smiles program, and the book comes with exclusive stickers and downloadable kindness activities. It's more than a book. It's a movement. Find Bajette's Balloon, The Magic of Smiles, wherever books are sold, or connect with author Claudia Colonna at Bajette, BAJETTE.com, or Bajette's Balloon on Instagram. The links are in our show notes today. I want to know about the characters, but before I do, I want to go back to the fact that this was a story that you started writing in 2010 and it's now 2025. What advice do you have for anyone who might be thinking about giving up on a creative project they've been working on? And that doesn't necessarily have to be writing. It could be art, whatever creative outlet. When do you know to put something aside? Like, when do you finally decide to put it into the graveyard file?
I think you should honor the graveyard and always think that you are a grave digger. Like, own those two things, because the fact is that writers do have to give up on work. It's very rare that you start a project and you can just go through without hitting skid marks and dry spots and you don't know what to do. So sometimes you have to put the project away for a day. Sometimes it's a week. Sometimes it's years. There's no telling. That's the truth, which is funny because I used to teach writing in high school. And, I didn't honor any of that. I assigned it. I gave a date that it was due. We did a couple of rounds of workshop, but it was due when it was due. And it didn't take into account what I now know is true about writing, which is that sometimes you can't finish it. You don't have what you need yet. Sometimes that's maturity. Sometimes it's world events. Sometimes it's just clarity or emotional space to be able to do the work that you need to do for that book. So, take heart is what I would say. Have a graveyard, put things in there. Don't be afraid to go back to the graveyard periodically and see what's there. See if you have a new idea. Work on it some. It's still not working. Okay, go on to the next thing. So I think it's okay to give up, but to give up with an open end, meaning I'm giving up for now. I may come back and it may become something beautiful. I may let it be. There's no telling. And that's the really hard part about being a writer. You think like it ought to get easier. That, you write your first book and then you learn to be better and your next one is better and your next one is better after that. And it's nothing like that. Nothing like that, especially not if you are challenging yourself to write new forms, experiment with what you can do, which is the exciting part about being creative. If you're doing that, then you're going to go up and down quite a bit.
Yeah. All right. So I want to talk about two of the specific protagonists in your book. So they're from very different worlds. So Graciela is a sea ghost, and Jorge is a mortal boy who fears water. He doesn't actually know how to swim. So talk to me about your exploration of such an unlikely friendship.
Yeah. I love both of these characters. And they are such unlikely allies. Jorge, to me, for me, he has so much valor. He's so valiant. And he's packaged in this thin boy who's really essentially neglected by his parents. And he's very quiet. He appears to be someone who can be pushed around and held down. But he's not. He has such a strong moral fiber about what's right, about what is kind, about what is meant, what is the right thing to do. I love that about him. And he was wonderful to write for those reasons, that I just cared for him so much. The story that I gave him, the family that I gave him, his circumstances were so bleak that he was an interesting combination, right? This young boy who ought to be terrible if you followed his family tree, but who was not. So you don't have to be, right, what people think you're destined to be.
Yeah.
You can be yourself. So I love that about Jorge. And with Graciela, so many regrets and just a sense of wanting to undo things that she can't undo. wanting to be remembered, just so frustrated that her life ended so briefly and so afraid to lose this one person, Amina, who is central to her, that she's willing to do really unthinkable things and selfish things to keep her friend to her. And I like writing Graciela because she also is strong and she's full of mistakes. And I think young people make lots of mistakes and they have to figure out when they're in a hole, how to stop digging, so to speak, and how to fix a mistake. And that's essentially what Graciela has to do. She has to figure out her way back to the right thing to do. And she has to figure out how to undo decisions that she's made that were the wrong decisions. And I think kids often have to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think the underwater world building that you did was fascinating. And I noticed in your acknowledgments, and hopefully I pronounced this name correctly, that Jill Heinerth, who wrote Into the Planet, helped with questions about the sea caves and the lava tubes that you've written about in the story. So why don't you tell us about the research that went into creating such a vivid ocean world? Because I think that's the important part about whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, magical realism. What is it that makes a reader believe this actually could be a real world? And that's because of the realistic elements that are relatable. And so anyway, talk to me about like the research that you did and what you read and all of that to create this world.
Yes. So I did read Jill Heinerth's work. I read a lot of oceanographers, especially female oceanographers and scientists who've done work in the caves that exist in the deep, and as much research as I could lay my hands on how the seafloor was mapped, what we've discovered. I was very interested in the women doing this work because it's been such a male-dominated field and so difficult to be an oceanographer when, for a long time, women weren't allowed on boats and so on to be part of the research. And the huge contributions of women into the field of oceanography. I'm fascinated by the idea that we know more about Mars than we do about Earth, the ocean. I was fascinated to learn, I just didn't know, that we have all of these different landforms beneath us, mountain ranges and lakes, and there's waterfalls in the deep. I mean, there's all of this stuff that you can't imagine, and yet it exists beneath us. So you're exactly right. When you're writing, especially fantasy that has elements that are recognizable from the actual world, I think what really helps is you need to use the research so that the fantasy elements seem plausible. So, for example, I was studying the currents and how they move. And so how would that intersect with the spirit world? Well, how about if we have spirits whose job it is to move the currents, and they do so by holding hands and dancing, sort of moving the currents that way. Mists that happen, fog haunters, are inside those mists, creating light and shapes and sound. Those cold spots, do you ever go in the water and suddenly it's cold for no reason? Yep. Well, guess what? A sea spirit just went by you. So you have to sort of figure out what is it in the natural world that the kids will know and recognize, and how does that mesh with what I know? The other fun part was thinking about sea spirits and what happens when they leave the water, driftwood, and all of the things. Those were the amazing moments. I mean, and you can get really tangled in research. It's so fun to do the research that it's easy to not write. Because you're learning. But I took copious notes and I wrote to the scientists with questions. And I said, what does a lava tube look like inside? And when it's inside a cave, in the water, et cetera. And, they answered. And I used all of the information. The mistakes are all my own. If there's any mistake in there, they certainly didn't lead me astray. But I tried to listen and create something that could feel like it could be in actuality.
Yeah, and the way you wrote it too, I could see it. And then of course there's like incredible artwork and illustrations that just kind of help. And yeah, talk to me about the artwork, because I just love how just textured it is too, because it's not often in a novel. Like, yes, we've gotten some, like, I think about Brian Selznick and how incredible, right? Often there's just some spot art. It'll be quite simplified and cute, and but this is full on art and the acrylic spray like splashes, and I love it.
It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. I agree with you. Ana and Elena Balbuso, they are known as the Balbuso twins. They're very well known graphic artists. They win lots of awards for their graphic work, but I'm so grateful that they took on this project, because their art adds a layer to the experience of reading this novel that's unbelievable. The illustrations do capture the eeriness of the deep, the beauty. It's also very stylized looking. It's beautiful artwork. So you can just, if you take a moment and just study the art that's in the book, you would have a beautiful experience as well. I'm so happy that they were the illustrators. I've been lucky over the course of my career to have wonderful illustrators attached to my work. But I'm just so pleased with the Balbuso twins' work here. It's beautiful. The cover, the spot art, all of it, large and small, the detail, the artistry, the elegance of it is so, I don't know, it took my breath away. But I'm partial, of course. But
yeah,
I
don't have to be partial, and it's incredible.
Good.
It's so good. In fact, I was telling a friend about it yesterday, who's also a children's book illustrator, an ALA winner, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's so incredible."
That's what I thought too. Yeah. That was my reaction also. I remember there were just a couple of spreads. There's one with Graciela when she comes into her full light, and this whale creature is about to get her, and I remember saying, I just took in my breath, because they captured that moment so well, the emotional moment beautifully. Yeah. They're really something.
Yeah. Well, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to read a few passages that just really stood out to me. And after I read them, I'd love to hear whatever thoughts come to mind as you listen. So any memories or insights about writing these parts, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So this is on page 35. And I have a advanced reader copy, so I always like to say that if you have a real copy in your hand, it could be a slightly different page. But for me, it's page 35. A tang of disappointment spread in the water, and though Graciela could hardly contain her relief, she found herself wanting to offer Amina comfort too. Suffering was strange that way. It didn't have to be your own for it to hurt.
It's true. And
then my next one is... Okay, so this is the very beginning of chapter 7. It is sometimes said that fisherfolk are prone to silly superstitions, but the villagers of Pesca Grotta knew that was wrong. To be a fisherman was to live on the thin edge between air and water. It meant wandering between life and death every single day. As surely as the sun rose in the east and set in the west, they were aware that powerful things lurked beneath the mirrored surface of the sea. They'd seen spirits' faces in sudden mists, heard the unearthly groans of the dead from long ago, seen abandoned vessels with their crews nowhere to be found. The dead roamed the sea, they knew, and it was best to leave them be.
Yeah.
Do you remember writing that?
I do remember writing that. I remember writing all of these moments. That how to start a chapter is often, you want to hook the reader, right? Sometimes you're giving them rest from what has happened before, but this was pulling out into the living, right? So now I'm not in the sea, I'm at the living, but I wanted to capture that that notion of applying, making your living on the ocean, on the water is just right there between two realms. And the whole novel is between two realms, life and death, and where those two things meet. So I think that chapter is a good, example of the larger way that it works. Yeah.
So do you have a favorite moment in the book? Or, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like, is there a passage that you would want to read to us? Or, or maybe just share like another piece of your favorite artwork. But what's a special moment in the book for you?
My favorite moment in the book is actually the very end. And not just because it took me 15 years to write this novel, because it captures the essence of friendship, and it captures, I think, they went on to be their best possible versions of themselves and found each other. For me, that felt, when I wrote that ending with Graciela's the last thing she says, it felt, I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not going to share it, but that felt right. It felt exactly right. Sometimes when you write an ending, you're like, I haven't stuck it quite yet. I haven't got it. But that felt right. So I think that for me was the favorite. And of course, the opening, the prologue, where we're setting up the world that Graciela has left behind, and the feeling, the promise of the novel. So the language of it, the otherworldliness of it. That was the first thing that I wrote for it. Even all those years ago, I remember having started with this early scene, and I really loved that. The cliffs, the wind, and the sea being the color of oyster shells.
I mean, both of those moments, I think, are my favorites too. And for any of our writer listeners, if somebody is wanting an example of a first chapter that's going to hook you, that prologue, like I was like, oh, wow, we're going there. This is going to be a great story. I was in. Yeah. So just reading the prologue from this book is like, it's such a great example of how to start a story and have the reader invested in, and, it was beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming close to the end, so I thought maybe we could end with some kind of light, fun, rapid fire questions.
Do it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So what scares you more, depths of the ocean or heights of the cliffs?
Oh, gosh. I would say heights of the cliff.
Okay. Which would you rather be, a sea ghost or a mortal with magical abilities?
A sea ghost.
If you could breathe underwater for a day, would you explore a shipwreck, a coral reef, or a deep sea trench?
A deep sea trench.
If you could possess one special ability from any character in your story, what would it be?
I would like to have Amina's ability to ward off attack or hatred by holding her hands in front of herself.
Me too. I want that one. In one word, what does the abyss in the title most represent?
Those deep spaces inside ourselves that we feel lost inside of.
And then this can be a longer answer. What's one thing that you'd like our listeners to take away from our conversation today? Just one thing, anything we've talked about. It could be something new, but what do you want to leave them with?
I want to leave them with the idea that when you're working on something, in this case, it's a book, but it could be anything. Sometimes it will not come together when you want it to, but that doesn't mean that it won't ever. So I think the idea of persevering, to wait with patience as you're building something that could be something really good and really satisfying. That's what I want to leave them with, both the writers and the readers.
Yeah. Well, Meg, what a privilege to dive into the depths of Graciela in the abyss with you. I
Thank
feel
you.
like I'm finally pronouncing her name, mostly correct. I mean, you've woven important themes about friendship, courage, finding one's place in the world, and the partnership between your words and the Balbusa sisters' illustrations has created something so truly magical. And I know that it's going to captivate young readers.
I hope so. That's my deepest wish.
Yeah, it will. And whether writing picture books or middle grade novels, your commitment to authentic storytelling shines through. And I especially appreciated hearing about the long journey that this book took from conception to publication. I think it's such a powerful reminder to our listeners that creative work often follows its own timeline.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing your creative process with us today and for crafting stories that honor the intelligence and emotional depth of your readers. And thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Happy reading.
Thank you so much for joining us on this quest for growing readers. We hope you loved this conversation with Meg Medina about Graciela in the Abyss. What an inspiring glimpse into both the underwater world she's created and her 15-year journey to bring this story to life. Links to Meg's website, her curated bookshop shelf from her time as National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, and where to order Graciela in the Abyss are all in our show notes. Remember Meg's beautiful reminder: sometimes our creative projects don't come together when we want them to, but that doesn't mean they never will. Patience and perseverance often lead to our most meaningful work. Until next time, happy reading. The Growing Readers podcast is a production of the Children's Book Review. To find more incredible books like Graciela in the Abyss, I hope you'll visit us at thechildrensbookreview.com. Find Bigette's Balloon, The Magic of Smiles, wherever books are sold, or connect with author Claudia Colonna at Bigette, BAJETTE.com, or Bigette's Balloon on Instagram. The links are in our show notes today.